Alright, folks, this is Rebel Rousing Rich Bergeron.
It's your hero in the idol, the Tornado Tony Pentecow.
And Psychic Tom Paget, raring to go.
Alright. And we got a lot of ground to cover this week. We have some major news coming through here. A couple big stories. Former boxing champion Victor Ortiz was recently arrested on some serious rape charges. Himself in,
Rich, do you have your radio on, Rich, or television or something? Hear you?
No, I think it might be on Tony's end.
No, not me. I got people behind me talking, but that's it.
Yeah, we can hear him.
Okay.
Oh, here's Mike Stanton. Hold on. Hello, Mike. Yes. Good. Oh. Yes. Yeah, I just called on the Skype just to put you in the system. Sorry. We'll call you at 9:15. I'll have to call you in the landline. Or this one we got programmed in, so if that works for you. Okay. Any line works for us. Okay. Yeah, we're actually live on now, unfortunately. Like a half hour would be fine. Okay, great. Thanks. Bye. There we go. Organizing on the fly there. That's Mike. Mike Stanton is going to be our guest tonight. The author of Rocky Marciano, the Rocky Marciano book, Unbeaten. That's the main name, Unbeaten, and the tagline is Rocky Marciano's Fight for Perfection in a Crooked World. And Mike is also the author of The Rise and Fall of Buddy Cianci. The Prince of Providence is the name of that book. And this was a New York Times bestseller. Also is he is an associate professor of journalism at the University of Connecticut, and was head of the investigative team at the Providence Journal, and shared a Pulitzer Prize with his team there. So, pretty big deal. Good stuff. And of course, Tony and I know so much about Rocky, so it's gonna be tough to keep him to a half hour, but I'm sure he'll probably go over it if he has to. Seems like he's pretty passionate about the guy too. Enough to write a book, so. Good stuff all around. As I was mentioning before we got interrupted by the call there, we're straightening stuff live on the air. Victor Ortiz turned himself in to Oxnard, California police Tuesday on multiple sexual assault charges, including forcible rape, forcible oral copulation, and forcible digital penetration, all felony offenses. So, a warrant had been out for his arrest after an investigation into a March incident at a woman's home in Tarzana, in which Ortiz was identified as a suspect. He was set to be the main event of a Premier Boxing Champions on FS1 card this Sunday against former sparring partner John Molina. And so basically, authorities said that a female adult contacted Oxnard police to report she was sexually assaulted in a city residence, launching a criminal investigation by the department's Family Protection Unit, and that culminated in the arrest. Ortiz was then released from jail on a $100,000 bond and scheduled to appear in Ventura County Superior Court on October 10th. Ortiz is best for his Fight of the Year showdown with Andre Berto, which he won by unanimous decision in a 4-knockdown thriller to claim the WBC welterweight belt. Then, of course, he had the controversial bout against Mayweather where he headbutted him and then tried to apologize, only to get clocked with his hands.
That was the funny meme they had. It was like, Victor Ortiz, we know he was like, trying sexual assault before, and they showed him like hugging and kissing Mayweather, and then getting punched in the face. Like, how to combat Mayweather's sexual, or how to combat Ortiz's sexual assault advances, and it was Mayweather punching him in the face.
Well, I guess we shouldn't be laughing about sexual assault, but that is kind of funny. Anyway, it's a big hot ticket in the news lately. Of course, we had the whole day with these Supreme Court hearing situations, sexual assault allegations. A little bit less serious than this one, but every time I think about this whole situation with Judge Kavanaugh, it's like, if they looked at everything I did in high school when I applied for my next job, I mean, wouldn't that be unconstitutional? Something.
Yeah, real.
It's pretty ridiculous.
Here was the thing I said, when I was a sophomore in Lock Haven, sophomore in Lock Haven, 19-year-old kid, I was in a health and physical education class. It was a prerequisite. You had to take it. So one day a week you'd be in the classroom, and one day a week you'd be doing some type of physical activity. And we were doing something related to the track and field one day, and we were running or something and doing whatever. And there was one girl, I think her name was Kim. That's all I remember from her. She was a nice enough girl. She dated a friend of mine, whatever. Well, we were both running something, and we kind of tripped, and when I kind of stumbled, my hand grazed her boob. So I guess I can never, try to go for anything anymore ever. Kim, after I haven't seen in 22 years, can come out and bring charges against me.
Yeah. I don't know. Thankfully, I didn't have any blackouts, so I don't have to worry about that coming back to me. But, oh, man. Poor guy. It is what it is. I don't know. I think she's confused myself, but who knows? Big circus.
I don't think she's confused. I don't think she's confused at all. Okay.
I think she's got a Pinocchio syndrome. Here's the thing. And Tom, you may disagree with me. But my thing is, I think a lot of people now, they have such a hatred on the red side of the political spectrum that if they're on the blue side and they see, oh my God, Trump's picking this person, well, I'm going to say, oh, I went to college with the guy he's picking, well, oh, he assaulted me.
Exactly. It's that derangement syndrome. And here Dick Durbin comes on and says, well, these women have nothing to gain. And I'm thinking, yeah? How about a wonderful speaking tour, $100,000 a pop? They have a lot to gain. The heroines of their party.
Right.
And, the heroines of the party, and they are throwing a monkey wrench into a person that they hate, a.k.a. Donald Trump.
Yes.
Wow.
So, no, you're right. So they have speaking engagements, they have that, and they have a lot more to gain than you think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, then, I guess we know how this show leans.
Yeah.
Well, to me, it gets down to just basic decency, regardless of politics. I mean,
correct.
When you go after a family man with 2 young daughters, saying those things, and they only remember one name, the guy that's like to punch. Not all the guys lined up to do the gang rapes. They don't remember their names.
Right.
Okay. Nothing political about this, of course.
Right.
It's just like the Nevada State Athletic Commission is above board in everything they do. Yeah. So are the enemies of this guy. Let's not get started. I was in a good mood,
All right. Slow down. Anyway, getting back to Victor Ortiz, he's had a tough route after the Mayweather loss. He's 3-1 in his last 7 fights, and his February draw versus Devin Alexander was considered one of the worst decisions in 2018. But during that time, he's had multiple run-ins with the law, including guilty pleas for DUI and assaulting a man at a Kenny Chesney concert, which I can relate to that because I wanted to punch some people that were in the pit at the Thomas Rhett concert I went to. But,
I don't go in the pit anymore.
Yeah.
That's why I always get a seat when I go to these things anymore, because I'm too old for that shit.
I had to stand there for 5 hours. Believe me, I'm feeling too old myself at this point. With that.
Yeah.
Anyway, they tried to keep the fight going. They bailed him out. They got him out of jail. But But his opponent, John Molina, who actually used to be his sparring partner, said he wouldn't fight him. So, I guess class act to him if these allegations are true, but that's kind of crazy. I'm not going to fight this guy. He just got arrested. I guess if you don't need the money, why not? Anyway, so that's in the news. We also had WWE got real. Wrestling is real sometimes. Did you know that, Tony?
Oh, I know.
Wrestling is real. Someone got injured on Raw Monday night. Female wrestler got kicked in the face full force twice. And actually passed out, knocked out for real. And they have to give her medical attention and everything.
Well, I remember reading Mick Foley's book. Mick Foley lost an ear in mid-match. Mick Foley, who, had a lot of problems. But he was saying in that one match against The Undertaker, they said he was out cold for a good stretch of the match. And they said in a real sport, that the thing would be over. But I said in the fake sport, we had to figure out a way to continue.
Mm-hmm. So it was Liv Morgan, popular WWE wrestler. She was serious.
Yeah, she's hot too.
During an episode of Monday Night Raw. 24-year-old woman whose real name is Gianna Daddio.
Good name.
How about that name? She was wrestling Brie Bella, and she was on her knees while Bella, 34, administered a series of kicks. And they're usually supposed to be pulled. They're not supposed to make serious contact. But Bella, who's also, they give her real name as Brianna Danielson, appeared to make serious contact with Morgan's face twice. And then Morgan crumbled to the ground face first, and she appeared to be unconscious for a moment. But Bella and Morgan initially continued with the match. Morgan was tagged out for a teammate, but returned and later took a plant move before almost rolling out of the ring. The program went to a commercial. And then the crowd was told that, she was receiving treatment backstage. And she had to be treated for a concussion. Nikki and Brie, Bella, account there, the Bella twins, took to social media to say, every match on Raw is an opportunity for us to entertain our fans. Our intentions as WWE superstars is to win the match, never injure our opponents. And she tweeted out that she's thinking about Liv. So, and this wasn't the first spot that Bella had missed lately. She botched 2 attempted dives in a match earlier. So.
See, that's what happens. You went there, you settle back, you have kids, and you learn that. You forget what you're supposed to do. You forget your profession.
So, yeah, she's keeping it real, but a little too real.
Yeah, a little too.
A little too real for the squared circle there. So anyway, I guess that's our wrestling news for the week. Since we covered so little. There's a great article on MMAfighting.com on this guy that unfortunately he's a Democrat, but he's got a plan to run for president. And this guy's name is Andrew Yang, and he's specifically pissed off about the UFC and the way they have such a low percentage of revenue going to fighters. And he says the UFC is only worth today as much as it is because the share of revenue that goes to fighters is kept relatively low compared to other sports. He says, and this was after he got disgusted because he read that Dana White talked about. He heard Dana White talking about how the UFC is now worth $7 billion, even though it just sold for $4 billion. So this is his exact words. This Andrew Yang. He says, I found it disgusting because the reason why it's supposedly worth $7 billion is because they are underpaying fighters by a factor of 4 relative to what they should be paying by any common sense standard, and also by the standard of other major sports. So Dana White is talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's like, MMA is going to be the biggest sport in the world. MMA is the biggest thing. And then he's paying people 10, 12% of revenues when every other major sport is paying between 47 and 51%. So I just got angry about that Dana White is such a moron, honestly. Because if you're going to exploit workers, you might want to keep that valuation under your hat. That, to me, is fairly common sense. And he's also very interested in the Leslie Smith case against the UFC with the National Labor Relations Board. And Smith is claiming that she got released by the UFC because of her role as the president of something called Project Spearhead, which is trying to organize fighters and determine if they're legally employees rather than independent contractors. And Yang actually donated a few months ago to Smith's GoFundMe, which she started to raise money for her legal fees for that case. And he added to the whole spectacle by saying this is a national story, but it's getting buried because it's MMA. He says they've benefited themselves, the UFC, from really significant industry bargaining power, and then they're passively siding with centimillionaire Dana White, who is nickel and diming the Leslie Smiths of the world. It's deeply screwed up. I see that most of these fighters are working their ass off to make chicken scratch. They should be getting paid 4 times more. So, and this is the other kicker. He says, the stars that have actually invested, including other sports stars. He says if the people that watch MMA, the UFC fans don't care, and the people that have bought the UFC don't care, these celebrities would care a lot, he says. And a lot of these celebrities know that if it was the case that their fans knew that they're personally profiting from Donald Trump screwing individual fighters like Leslie Smith out of their livelihood, that would be a huge problem. Then they would look at their agents and be like, what did you get me into? I don't know. That sounds like the Red Rock Resort strategy of like, the union said, let's mail letters to all the acts showing up at Red Rock Resorts and get them to stop playing there. And that's the problem with some of this stuff where they're trying to organize against. I mean, yeah, they've got their facts straight. It is a crooked organization, but I mean, it's not going to do anything. I mean, these guys invested, they're trying to make money. They won't care either. If the fans don't care and the people that own the company don't care, the celebrities aren't going to care either. So, yeah, nice try, but it's just a waste. You got to do something big.
So this guy's going to run for president in 2020?
Yeah. And he's claiming that Donald Trump is holding up this National Relations Board because he's a friend of Dana White, which, I mean, I guess could be true. Really, does he really need to go to that level, though? I mean, does he really need to get that nitpicky that he's going to do a favor for a friend and tell the National Labor Relations Board what to do? I don't know. Well, that's kind of conspiracy theory out there for me. But he's claiming all it would take is to enforce the given law to help these fighters. All it would take would be to say would be saying to the National Labor Relations Board, hey, you have this complaint. The UFC, by any legal standard, is employing these fighters. So, I mean, he's thinking one case, this case being judged in Leslie Smith's favor, and them being labeled as employees would fix everything. I think that's a little short-sighted, but I mean, he does have some decent quotes there about what they're doing, and I would say it's at least four times what they make now that they should be making. He's right there too, but some of these things he's got no real plan. He's got no real plan for this. I mean, what's his plan for the presidency? Maybe I'll write him a letter and I'll say, hey, I know all about the guys that ran the UFC, and if you really want to make a difference, let's just educate the public about it and then see what they do. Who knows? Anyway, let's see what else we got. We got UFC Fight Night 137. Santos versus Anders went down pretty quickly. Oh no, this one went 3 rounds. Into the 3rd round. TKO from elbows. 5 minutes. It says 5 minutes in the 3rd round. Was that the end of the 3rd round that this happened? I don't know. But there was a TKO. Thiago Santos won the fight by TKO from elbows. I didn't really get to see that. I kind of tuned in right as it was ending. Then before that, we had Alex Oliveira beating Carlo Pedersoli Jr. by knockout, just 39 seconds in, with some serious punching there. That was some flashy striking there. And then Smiling Sam Alvey did not really want to smile there, meeting Antonio Rogerio Nogueira. Blew him out of the water with a TKO of his own 1 minute into the second round. So Smiling Sam Alvey did say afterwards he is not going to lose another fight in the octagon. I don't know if he's put money on that, but that's what he says. So we'll see. I said last week, this is kind of a big bite for him to chew here. So Antonio just proved he's just got the experience and the skill to keep it going even at his age. Good stuff there. And then Andre Ewell got a split decision win over Hanan Barao. And we had a knockdown drag-out draw between Randa Marcos and Marina Rodriguez. Majority draw there. Charles Oliveira got slipped in a rear naked choke on Christos Giagos. 3 minutes and 22 seconds into the second round. Francisco Trinaldo beat Evan Dunham, who said this was going to be his last fight and retired after that. Took a vicious knee to the body, probably broke a rib. 4 minutes and 10 seconds into the second round and just went down like a sack of potatoes, and ref called off shortly after that. Before that, we had Ryan Spann beating Luis Enrique Barboza de Oliveira by unanimous decision. Augusto Sakai beat Chase Sherman by TKO in the third round. 4 minutes and 3 seconds into that one. Sergio Moraes beat Ben Saunders by an arm triangle choke submission. 4 minutes and 35 seconds into the second round. And we had Myra Bueno Silva beating Jillian Robertson by armbar submission with just 5 seconds left to go in the first round. Tilly's Lates beat Hector Lombard by unanimous decision, the third fight of the night. Elizu Zaleski dos Santos beat Luigi Vendramini by flying knee and punches. 1 minute and 20 seconds into the second round. And then the first fight of the night, Livia Renata Souza beat Alex Chambers by guillotine choke. 1 minute and 21 seconds into the first. And we've also got Bellator 205 to recap here pretty quickly. That was the one that was quick. Knockout punch win for AJ McKee. Made quick work of John Teixeira de Conceição. I'm butchering that. That was first round, 1 minute and 9 seconds in. The co-main event, Rafael Lovato Jr. over John Salter by rear naked choke. 4 minutes and 27 seconds into the third round.
Yeah, that was quite a skill battle on the ground. Quite a chess match.
Yeah, good fight. Vita Arteaga also got a big win with a guillotine choke. 4 minutes and 24 seconds into the second round over Denise Kielholtz. And before that, one of the Pitbull brothers, Patricky Freire, beat Roger Huerta by knockout 43 seconds into the second round. And there's only 5 other people on this card. No, 6 with pictures, so we're not even going to go through the rest of it. We're going to go right to boxing, and then we'll go to this weekend's big Bellator card, which is much bigger. Over the weekend, the biggest fight we had was the heavyweights. Anthony Joshua beating Alexander Povetkin, I believe it was a 7th round TKO.
It was. Obviously, the fight wasn't aired. It must have been on one of them stupid apps or something. So I followed a tracker, and it was saying on there, like, okay, first round, this. And right around the 6th round, they said, Povetkin's, he's fighting hard. He's, doing the best he can, being older and, the older guy and, a little bit slower. But he's like, lands himself. So like, yeah, we'll have to keep, look on this because he was able to land a few right hand. Then it goes to the 7th round, and they're like, the fight's over. I'm like, shit. And then I was able to catch the highlights a little bit later, and Joshua staggered him pretty good, hit him with a good left hook in the 7th, buckled him, and then he finally knocked him down. And then Povetkin got up, and Joshua landed 2 or 3 more punches, and the referee grabbed him as he was going down again. So it was a good stoppage.
All right. Well, wasn't a whole lot of other big stuff going on last weekend, but we do have some fights. Big fight coming up tomorrow night. George Groves in what I believe is the World Boxing Super Series final. He's got a big fight there. I'll find him here. Friday night. George Groves, 28-3, fighting in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Doesn't happen very often. At the King Abdullah Sports City. George Groves is fighting Callum Smith, who is undefeated at 24-0. And it's going to be for the WBA Super World Super Middleweight title and the WBC Diamond Super Middleweight title. The co-main event, of course, Chris Eubank Jr., 26-2, fighting J.J. McDonough, 16-4. And Saturday night's fights here. We got a couple good ones, I'm sure. Here's one from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Rose Volante, 13-0, fighting Luis Marugo Franco, who's 22-9-4 for the WBO World Female Lightweight title. Nothing real awesome on the undercard there, but then we go to Cornwall, Ontario, Canada. Albert Ono-Lanose, 23-1-1, fighting Patrice Volney, who's 11-0 for the vacant WBA NABA middleweight title and the WBO NABO middleweight title. Co-main event there is Thierry Jean, 29-2-1 at welterweight, fighting Abraham Gomez, who's 28-16-1. Ooh, mismatch of the week in France. And Sophie DaCosta, 25-3, fighting a poor little Kitty Colompar. She's 1-3. 1-3 versus 25-3 in the main event.
Mismatch of the week.
Oh, that's horrible. That's a light flyweight, but still. That's bad. You know, the co-main event is not even any better. Melanie Mercier, who is 1-3-1, fighting Claudia Ferenczi, who's 17-65-8. This is an all-female card. But I've never seen
eight draws.
I've never seen a female fighter with that many losses. That's crazy. I've never seen a female fighter with that many fights. How did she get that many fights?
God.
This a female.
8 draws.
It's crazy. Anyway, going on to Germany, we've got Erkan Tepper, 19-2 at heavyweight, fighting Robert Helenius, who is 27-2 for the vacant IBF Intercontinental heavyweight title. That's really the only big fight on that card. Hamburg, Germany, we got some undefeated fighters in the main event. Sebastian Formella, 18-0, and Elias Eswadi, who is 13-0 for the World Boxing Organization European Super Welterweight title. Let's see. And then we got the little guys, the real little guys in Tokyo. Tsubasa Kura, 13-0, and Daiki Tomita, who's 12-0, for the OPBF minimum weight title. I don't know what.
Is that 105 pound, I think?
Soaking wet. I don't know. 90-pound weaklings? I don't know. Does it go that much?
I think minimum weight. I think it's the same as Charlotte, 105.
Oh, okay. Minimum weight. Yeah, you know it's pretty low weight when they minimum weight. Jeez. Any lighter, you can't box, they say. You cannot be.
Well, wasn't the phrase 97-pound weaklings? Yeah. That was the Charles Atlas. Right.
I think it was 97 pounds, I'm 5.
else we got going on. There's one in Singapore. Paulus Ambunda, who is 26-2, fighting Muhammad Ridwan, who's 11-0 for the vacant IBO World Super Bantamweight title. Co-main event, Michael Das Marinas, who is 28-2, fighting Manuel Plang, who's 17-0. No title on the line there for some reason. Some good records. Then we got a one-fight card in Cantabria, Spain. Welterweight Sergio Garcia, or super welterweights, I should say, 27-0, fighting Maxime Boissier, who is 27-1-1 for the EBU super welterweight title. That's another one. Should be for a world title with those kind of records. Oh well. Well, he's not a wannabe, but he's a Watanabe. In Taipei, fighting Takuya Watanabe. He's 34-8-1, fighting Paboon Lorcan, who's 19-10 for the vacant OPBF Silver Super Featherweight title. And how about this female fight? This is a long title. Wenzi Huang, she's 9-3-1, fighting Jarusari Rongmuang, who's 3-0. And they're fighting for the vacant World Boxing Council, Asian Boxing Council, Continental Female Super Flyweight title.
By the title.
How do you fit that on the title? That's what I want to know. Yikes. All right. Here's an interesting main event in Staffordshire, United Kingdom. Now, how about this guy's name, first of all? Super lightweight Kosh Buttery. Just like it sounds, Buttery. Buttery. He's that buttery fighter. He's 3-0. Fighting Liam Richards, who's 12-51. The main event. Yikes. Crazy. And there's a guy who's 7-64 on the card named Elvis Dubé. Anyway. Here's a serious one. Indio, California. Golden Boy Promotions. Jorge Linares at super lightweight, 44-4, fighting Abner Cotto, who is 23-3. And then the co-main event there, Oscar Duarte, 14-0-1, fighting Roger Gutierrez, who is 19-2-1. Also on that card, Travel Mazion, who is 13-0, fighting Alan Zavala, who's 15-2, and that's welterweights and lightweights. Romero Duno, 17-1, fighting Ezequiel Aviles, who is 16-2-3. Right. I don't know how this is for a title, but down at the Rising Star Casino in Rising Sun, Indiana, we have a main event. Jeff Camp, 4-2-1, fighting Demetrius Wilson, 2-9, for the vacant American Boxing Federation USA Mid-American Super Lightweight title. These guys don't even have 5 years.
I wonder what would that look like on the trophy? You know, it's hard to get all those words on there,
Boxing Federation.
This guy, his record is 2-9, and he's fighting for that title. Okay.
I don't get it. Okay, because like half of the thing is American, and then they just throw USA in the middle of it. The American Boxing Federation. Okay, that's the sanctioning organization. Okay, but it's their USA Mid-American Super Lightweight title. So what is that? USA is in the middle of America. I don't know. That's crazy. So the next one on the card, Charles Natal, 10-1, fighting Chucka Willis. Natal 10-1-2. Willis is 3-5. This one's for the vacant American Boxing Federation USA Mid-American Super Welterweight title. Then we got the female fight. 4-0 Bertha Arcel. She's super welterweight, fighting Sarah Curran, 3-1, for the vacant ABF USA Female Super Welterweight title. But no Mid-American for them. That's just the whole USA. not even 5 fights. No. 8 fights combined between these two fighters, and they're going for a title. It's a national title. Don't even let me call John Scully again. We called him by accident before you got on the air. Alright, final fight of the week worth mentioning here from Brooklyn, DeBella Entertainment. Melissa St. Beal is leading the card. She's 10-3-4, fighting Myra Hernandez, who's 6-0, no title, but should be a good fight at featherweight. Super middleweight's also on the card. Evert Bravo, 24-8-1, fighting Junior Yunnan, who is 13-0-1. Josu Vargas, who is 11-1, fighting Dayu Mercy Nzao, who's 11-5. And that's really it worth mentioning there. And let's recap or preview Bellator 206 here before we get on the phone with our friend Mike Stanton, author of Unbeaten, Rocky Marciano's Fight for Perfection in a Crooked World. So, Bellator 206. The big fight here is the main event, Mousasi versus McDonald. And different styles from these guys, but both definitely warriors. Mousasi has been very dominant since his crossover to Bellator. McDonald has had a little bit of mixed results. It always seems to just draw the toughest fights possible, this guy, Rory. And you got to respect him for being a warrior, but it's just sometimes I cringe just watching this guy take punishment, and you wonder how much he can take fighting in that kind of style. And it's not just that he's not good at defense or anything, it's just that he's willing to brawl in the brawling situations, and just puts too much of himself out there and is not cautious enough when he is hurt sometimes. So I really hope he brings a little bit more hands up, backing up a little bit when necessary strategy here against Mousasi, because he's a killer when he wants to be, especially with the leg kicks. I mean, he's left some people really hurt and really bruised up with his leg kicks, and that just starts weakening people for striking. And he is definitely one of the best strikers in Bellator. So this one is going to be an absolute war. I don't even want to predict the winner of this one because it's almost impossible. They're very well matched. But Mousasi does have the experience with a 44-6-2 record over McDonald with a 20-4 record. What does your crystal ball tell us on this one, Tom?
It's foggy. I got to really focus.
If I had to pick, I'd just say Mousasi because he has been on a streak. And he is pretty good.
Yeah, because you just wonder about Roy. Will it be showtime with him as far as just these brutal fights? I mean, that last one, you see what his leg looked like.
Right.
And after that second Lawler fight, when he was in the hospital while I was in there with him, and I'm thinking, God, the guy's young, but how much can you take? So I would agree. I would give Mousasi a slight edge. And remember up in
exactly.
That's not helping either.
Well, if that was not hard enough to predict, Quentin Jackson versus Wanderlei Silva, the rematch, is the co-main event. Rampage is 37-13. Wanderlei is 35-13 with one draw. Ironically, they both face each other with the unlucky 13 losses. But this one is bad blood between these two guys. They obviously fought a couple times before, and Quentin got both wins, didn't he?
No, Quentin lost both of them in fight, but then Quentin won in the UFC, and I think he's going to win this one, simply because I think he has more left.
So this is the fourth fight. Okay.
Yeah, so this will be the fourth. And Quentin was brutally knocked out both times in Pride. I remember they used a ring over there, and one of the knockouts, he actually went right out of the ring, boom, at first. But I just think Wanderlei's had a great career. Right now, he's just a shell of himself.
Yeah, I really think Jackson is definitely going to run away with this one. And Wanderlei, I kind of harbor a little bit of resentment from him because I tried to warn him about science and he stuck with him. When I was actually out in Vegas, I went to his gym and everything, and tried to talk to him about it. His people were kind of douchebags to me, so more power to you, Quentin. Let's see a rampage of this guy. No love for Wanderlei. Anyway, Douglas Lima, 29-7, also on the card over Andrei Koreshkov, or actually against, I should say, Andrei Koreshkov, who's 21-2. So that one should be another fierce battle of experienced fighters there. And then Aaron Pico, trying to make a name for himself there and trying to prove his star power. And had a rough start, obviously. He lost his first fight where he was expected to roll over the guy. And he's strung 3 wins together since then. So he's going to go in against Leandro Higo, who is a long-time Bellator veteran, 18-4 there. And then next fight, Kerry Ann Taylor Melendez, 2-0, fighting Dakota Zimmerman, who's making her debut. We got Gaston Bolanos, 3-1, versus Isidro Gutierrez, who's 4-2. And we won't go through the rest of the card. This one is interesting. Arlene Blencow, we got a female fight kind of tucked in the middle. She's 10-7, fighting Amber Liebrock, who is 3-1. Also, there's a lot of male fights. Alright, so let's hope Skype works. We're going to try to add Mike to the conversation. Add people. We still got both you guys?
Yep.
Okay. Just check. This thing takes so long sometimes. Come on, add people. Alright, I'm just gonna dial it, I guess. Oh boy. And this is Mike Stanton, author of Unbeaten, Rocky Marciano's Fight for Perfection in a Crooked World. Trying to get hold of here. I guess I can't call it out that way. Hello, Mike.
Hello? Hi, Rich?
Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening. You're on the air. We're with myself. I call myself Rabble Rousing Rich. We got Tony the Tornado Penical on the line and Psychic Tom Paget with us as well.
All right. Quite the crew. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
All right, so Tony and I have a little bit of history with Rocky. I'll let Tony tell his story first. He's definitely going to tell his story about the fight. So go ahead, Tony. Tell him how you got in touch with the Rocky Marciano story.
This is one of my favorite stories that I tell everybody. I was born in 1976, 7 years after Rocky had tragically passed away. And when I was about six and a half years old, my grandfather and my great-uncle both died when I was around 7. So shortly before they both passed away, Rocky 3 had come out. And I'm a little kid. I'm 6 years old. And it was on TV a lot, and I was watching it. And one day, we were having family Sunday pasta dinner, and they felt it was time to tell me about the great Rocky Marciano. And I got confused because I just Rocky 3. And I said, yeah, I was watching on TV. He beat Clubber Lang, and one of them, I don't remember which one, smacked me upside the back of the head. He said, you know, kid, you watch too much of that movie bullshit. And they told me how great Rocky was, and I said, he couldn't be beaten. And I remember, I was a kid. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And they both passed away within a year of that. And years later, and me being a little kid, I don't know, my dad's cousin, who was the son of my great uncle that passed away, was telling me as I got older, and I got into boxing myself, how he was. By the way, I'm from Philadelphia, where Rocky was heavyweight champion. And so my great uncle was at the fight with Jersey Joe Walton, and he had come up to one of my, unbeknownst to me, was coming up to one of my in 1997, and he had some health issues, and I thank Lord he is still with us today, and he's doing great. But he was having health issues, and he was very fearful that if something happened to him, some of his father's prized possessions would fall to his brother, who would sell. He was a wheel and dealing kind of guy, and he was always looking to make a deal. Always want to sell and buy and this and that. So he came up to my one day. We were fighting up in State University, New York, Westchester. And the guy that was doing the show was a guy named by the name of Steve Acunto, who used to hold a Rocky Marciano dinner every year. And
I talked to Steve Acunto for the book. I went to his house.
Yeah, Steve passed away not too long ago. I fought on him a couple times. And so my dad and my uncle come up to this fight, and they pulled me aside after it was over, and my uncle hands me the program and the ticket stub.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
As well as a bunch of newspaper articles from the Walcott rematch and the first fight with Ezra Charles. So they knew I would treasure them, and what I did was I put them all in frames, and now they hang downstairs in my basement gym. So whenever anybody comes over to train, or if I'm doing anything where I show them my gym area, and I show some of my memorabilia and some of my fight stuff, and I show them some fight programs of fights that I've been to, then I always take them to that one last, and I say, yeah, I was in the 4th row that night. And then they look and they see the date on there, September 23rd, 1952, and they look at me and I say, I'm really big enough, but I'd say, well.
Yeah, you're ageless.
I am ageless. And
you
what
were
also
right there with Frank Sinatra for that fight, right?
Yeah, I'm the chairman, right? And I actually have another thing is like a matter of luck. A few years ago, I was at a fight card, and the one gentleman there was a guy my dad had worked with, and they were electricians together. Well, his father-in-law was a former police officer and a former professional boxing referee who refereed some early Joe Frazier fights out of the Philadelphia area, managed a couple fighters, but he also, back in the late 40s and early 50s, trained in Brooklyn under Charlie Goldman with Rocky Marciano. His name's Hank Sisko. Hank's brother Tony was one fight away from getting a shot at the heavyweight title against Joe Louis.
Wow.
So, and Hank, for being 9 195 is very well. I had dinner with him 2 weeks ago, and I had him in the house last year, and he came in, he got to see the program, and he was there that night as well, and, you know, he almost started tearing up. And,
Wow.
you know, something that, you know, we talk about, and, I mean, you get a real personal feel to it, which is something that's been very important to me.
That's a great story. I mean, I think that you really speak to why I wrote this book, because, you know, boxing is such a, you know, sport that has so many memories and, you know, traditions that are passed on from one generation to the next. And I wanted to kind of recreate this lost generation, this, you know, one of the last golden ages when boxing was king. And, you know, what it was like to be at those big fights in, you know, Philadelphia or New York, and when everybody hung on what was happening. And, you know, the like Charlie Goldman took all his experience in the ring in the early 1900s, and he passed it on to Rocky. And, you know, he was also a mentor of trainers like Lou Duva, who I, you know, interviewed for the book before he passed away a few years ago.
As well.
Yeah, we got to interview him probably right around the time the Rocky Marciano statue got dedicated. I think it was like a couple weeks before that.
You interviewed Lou Duva?
Yeah.
Yeah, Lou was great. And
he was a little hard to understand.
Got him in 2009.
Yeah.
That was truly well.
But that's the thing, you know, these traditions and, you know, get passed on. You know, there's Charlie Goldman from the early 1900s, and then he's Rocky's trainer, and he passes on his knowledge to a new generation of trainers, including Angelo Dundee hung around him a lot. And Lou Duva, you know, he used to tell me that he was in his family trucking business, but that his heart wasn't in it. He loved boxing, and he would finish his route and drive over from New Jersey into Manhattan, and he'd go to, Stillman's and watch the fighters and hang around Charlie Goldman and the trainers, and then eventually he got into it, and when he was young, you know, Charlie was training Rocky, and he became friends with Rocky,
right,
and spent a lot of time with him.
I remember Lou even told us, you know, the night Holyfield knocked out Buster Douglas to win the heavyweight title in 1990, when he got in the ring, you know, after the 10 count, and he pointed up the sky and was like, "This one's for you, Rocky."
Yes, he told me that story. It was very emotional, and, you know, like a lot of people, these hardened fight guys, you know, a lot of them cried when Rocky died. You know, Muhammad Ali's wife at the time told me that, you know, they really bonded when they filmed that, you know, hokey computer fight. Shortly, and when Ali found out Rocky died, she said it was the only time she ever saw Muhammad Ali cry. And, you know, he ran through several red lights to get to Rocky's wake down in Florida.
One thing that, and I'm going to make sure that I get this one video to you shortly after we finish tonight. When we had the statue dedication back in 2012, it was actually last week, last Sunday, was the 6-year anniversary of it. I do video editing as a hobby. It's something I train myself how to do. I play around with some software. I am by no means a professional, but what I did that day, I took a lot of the still photos, and I just did a slideshow to music. You know, nothing. You know, I got a lot of celebrities that were there. You know, the Larry Holmeses and Mickey Ward, Vito Anafarmo. You know, all those guys that were there, and just Jose Suleiman, who was instrumental in getting it done. And I made a nice video. It's like I said, by no means is it professional. It was something that I enjoyed doing. And we were just saying a minute ago how, you know, boxing has that type of bond to it. Here is crazy the way things work out. Rich and I, in 1998, were 2 fights away from fighting each other for the National Collegiate Championship. We almost...
Yeah,
because, I mean, Rich was at the time boxing for Virginia Military Institute. I was boxing for Lock Haven University under Dr. Ken Cox. And originally, Rich's name was brought up as a possible opponent of mine for my senior year home show, the annual show we had at Lock Haven. and they picked a guy instead of him. Rich didn't come up to the show. They picked another guy by the name of Mike Jordan, and he looked like Michael Jordan, so we announced him as Michael Jordan. And then I beat him. Then we ended up going to we each ended up in the Nationals in a different bracket, which ended up losing in the semis to Michael Jordan on a decision. I lost the decision in a one round to the eventual 3-time champion, who was 6'7", 180 pounds. How fair is that?
Well, if you were Rocky, you would have gotten inside of him and just.
This guy was big. I don't know how that guy made weight. I mean, he was giant. I used to tell people, whenever I told the story about this guy, that he could hit you while you were sitting on your stool from across the ring.
Oh my gosh, that would probably be illegal though.
Yeah.
But, Rocky had one characteristic he shared with Michael Jordan, the basketball player, and that's that intense moments of competition, he would stick his tongue out.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that.
Around his mouthpiece, and his brother Sonny would spar with him and did an exhibition tour with him up in Maine, and talked about once he got a little cocky because Sonny was a good athlete, and he popped Rocky, and suddenly Rocky, a look went into his eyes, and he was no longer Sonny's brother. He was, and the tongue came out, right. And Sonny said he quickly thought, thinking quickly, he said, "Rocky, I'm going to tell Ma," and Rocky snapped out of it before he killed him. So, yeah, he's crazy.
So,
one person he was
I just have to remember Rich, because obviously going to the Nationals that year, I scouted every potential opponent in my weight class. And maybe 10 years later, maybe 8-9 years later, a mutual friend of ours, Iceman John Scully, who I'd communicated with a lot online, sent me an article that a guy wrote about him, Rich Bergeron. I said, Rich Bergeron? I said, I was supposed to fight a guy named Rich Bergeron one time with VMI. Iceman sends him a message. Rich gets a hold of me. We were going to fight? Yeah, you lost to Michael Jordan. I lost to the 6'7" guy. We start talking. And, you're from Massachusetts. Oh, yeah, that's really cool, blah, 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 blah. A year later, I'm coming up to Mass. I'm coming up to a Red Sox game just to see Ben White. And the kid, not going to wear any Phillies shit, are you? I'm like, no, Dad, they're not even playing the Phillies. He said, what you get to wear? I said, get some Marciano shirts. So I look online, I find this beautiful black shirt with a knockout punch over Jersey Joe. I said, let's get that shirt. Let me try and get it in time. I made a phone call, and lo and behold, it was Rocky's nephew, Dennis. I started talking to Dennis. I said, let me put my little schmoozing here and there. Ran down, snapped a picture of the program, the articles, a few still photos that I had framed. And he goes, you must be a big fan. Yes, sir, I am. And he goes, well, you know what? And when we started talking about the statue, 3 years later, we want you here as a guest of the family, and that's how history is made.
Yeah, it's a great statue, and I like how it looks out over the football stadium, and the team that is now nicknamed the Boxers. That used to be the Shoemen back when Rocky was playing high school football at Brockton High. And Rocky's brother-in-law, Arlen Colombo, went on to be the winningest coach in Massachusetts high school history at Brockton High School. Yeah. And he just retired a few years ago, and his son coaches the team now. So they do it under the watchful gaze of the statue of Rocky. So that's kind of a cool story. And, Brockton was the great melting pot, and they only had one high school, so all the different kids from the different neighborhoods, rich and poor, all had to kind of mingle together, Irish and Italian and Jewish and Lithuanian and French and the factory owners' sons and the factory workers' kids. So even though there was rivalries, they all kind of learned to get along.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I didn't know word one about Rocky until I met Dennis, the guy that Tony was just talking about, the nephew of Rocky. He was running something called the Rocky Marciano Foundation. And he was basically selling T-shirts. That was his main source of income. So I actually went to one of the Thanksgiving Brockton football games with him to sell T-shirts. I went to the Brockton Fair and met Charlie Tartaglia there. Had him on my radio.
Well, a lot of the pictures from the statue ceremony and people that went are up at George's Cafe, which is the Tartaglia's a great restaurant, old school Italian.
They have
restaurant.
tons and tons of pictures of the guy, and then it's
like a shrine. Yeah. It's like a history museum. I mean, I spent a lot of time in there when I was in Brockton researching the book. I would go there for lunch and talk to people, and I would just walk around and, you know, look at all the pictures on the wall, and, you know, the people would tell me, oh, there's a corner booth where Rocky and Ali Colombo and the Tartaglias would sit after one of his fights in Providence, and they'd sit there late at night and, you know, chew the fat about everything.
Right.
So it was like living history there.
Definitely.
And a lot of people have made the pilgrimage there. You know, Ali went there, and, you know, a lot of famous people whose pictures are up on the wall, too.
And when they did the statue dedication, what's his name there? Larry Holmes had a grand old time there. Singing songs and everything. He had a really good party there with his entourage.
Yeah, well, he was making peace with the family from his,
bad comment.
You know, infamous episode when he was going to break Rocky's record, and he was upset, and then he got upset in the post-game press conference and started ripping the Marciano legacy, and Rocky's brother Peter and Rocky's children were there, and it got a little ugly. And I talked to Lee Montville, the great sports writer who worked for the Boston Globe at the time. He was there, and he said it looked like Peter wanted to go fight Larry Holmes, and Peter kind of looks like Rocky, and he talked to him on the phone. He sounds like Rocky, and but then later Larry regretted that. It was the heat of the moment of the loss, and he, you know, and he made some points. I mean, you know, Rocky. He said Rocky was fighting old fighters on the way down, and, you know, I'm fighting young guys on the way up. So, you know.
Now, when you're writing this book, what would you say was the thing that set you apart from every other book on Rocky that you brought to this?
On Rocky?
Right.
Well, I kind of approach this, you know, I kind of approach this as the investigative reporter I've been, and in my career, I worked many years at the Providence Journal, and, I wrote a previous book called Prince of Providence about the longtime roguish mayor, Buddy Cianci.
Quite the
character. And in researching that book, Buddy grew up in the 1940s in Providence, and his father was a doctor, and he used to take him to the Rhode Island Auditorium to see the Monday night fights, and Rocky Marciano, the young up-and-coming blockbuster from Brockton, about 30 miles away, was one of the headliners. And so, as I was researching Buddy's life for that first book, I just thought this was a really colorful, interesting scene. And of course, I knew about Rocky, and he's a New England sports icon. But he's kind of one of those guys that, you kind of know about, but you don't really know his full story, and it hadn't really been told in a while. There's a couple of good books that I enjoyed reading about him. Everett Cian's book, and then Russell Sullivan's book, which came out in the early 2000s, I believe. But, it hadn't really been told in a while, and I wanted to tell it like a newspaper writer would, where I kind of recreate what that era was like, and just go try to dig up as many records as I could to kind of, chronicle people's memories. And so I found one of the things I found that was interesting that kind of gets overlooked in the interviews I've been doing is, early in Rocky's career, when he started fighting amateur fights, there was this former boxer named Gene Caggiano who ran a lot of the amateur boxing shows around Brockton, and he was Rocky's first manager and trainer. And there was a lot of dispute about how much he really helped them. And after Rocky, they had kind of a falling out over money and ticket sales and Rocky's cut. And, Rocky turned pro and wound up going with Al Weil in New York, and Charlie Goldman is his trainer. And Gene Caggiano sued him for breach of contract, as he had signed something committing himself to use Caggiano if he turned pro. And the case went to a trial, and, when Caggiano first sued, Rocky had just turned pro. He fought maybe 3 or 4 fights in Providence. It was no big deal yet. And by the time the case finally winds its way to trial, a few years later, Rocky is now, the top contender. And so now this suit has a lot more value to it. And there was a trial, and Rocky lost. And now it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? This could threaten his whole career, because without a while, he's not going to continue to rise towards the title. And so Rocky, they appealed to the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And, you know, Rocky continued to fight. And then the year that he, I think it was the year he fought Kid Matthews, he finally, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. And I was able to find the transcript of that trial, over 200 pages worth.
Wow.
And it was a gold mine, because what it was people testifying at the time just about details of Rocky's early career and his early amateur fights, who he was fighting, you know, some colorful stories about those fights from people who were there, and, you know, just the circumstances of his turning pro. For instance, you know, there's a kind of the apocryphal story that used to get told in previous stories, was that he and Ali Colombo, you know, hitched a ride on a produce truck to New York, because they didn't have 2 dimes to rub together between them, and went to see the great Al Weil and had an audition. But I found in the transcript that, you know, little things, but, you know, Rocky's Uncle Mike actually drove them down, and they stayed at the Forest Hotel, which is a legendary hangout across from Jacobs Beach in Midtown Manhattan, you know, near the Garden. And, you know, and they went over and worked out with Charlie Goldman. So there's a lot of great information in there that was really useful. And at one point, Charlie Goldman comes up to the trial, and he's trying to explain that Caggiano didn't really know boxing very well, and he's demonstrating how he gets off the witness stand and asks the judge if he can demonstrate how to throw punches. And he's showing how Caggiano, you know, under Caggiano, Rocky was punching upside down and leaving himself open and doing all these really fundamental things wrong. And so it's interesting just to hear them all talking, and it's valuable because it was, you know, at the time it wasn't people remembering years later when memories get cloudier. So that was one example, and I just, you know, was able to unearth a lot of stuff like that, and then talk to surviving family members who gave me some great, you know, stories that I don't think had ever been out there before about him. And, you know, one of the things that kind of broke new ground that people have commented on is I discovered that when he was in the Army during World War II over in England, getting ready to deploy to Normandy for D-Day, he got into a jam and wound up being court-martialed and sentenced to military prison. And
yeah, I had never heard that before your book. Never even heard of this of it.
Yeah, hadn't come out. And, you know, back then, I mean, part of the thing I try to talk about in the book is just that golden age of sports in the 50s when athletes were heroes. And, you know, for better or worse, you know, writers didn't really dig into the dark corners of their lives like they do today. And, you know, so I often wonder, you know, how did writers know about it and just, you know, overlook it? Or I suspect they kind of knew something had happened, but I think there was also a bit of a cover-up back then. Because it's interesting, Sports Illustrated, you know, they let me into their archives, and that's another rich treasure trove, because back then these, you know, Time Life empire that SI was part of, you know, they had armies of reporters who would go out and, you know, gather exhaustive facts for a story that then would be written in New York, and only a fraction of the information would be used. But all that material was in SI's files. So when Rocky was getting ready to fight Walcott for the title, Sports Illustrated, or actually it was Life magazine, sent a reporter to Brockton and interviewed everybody that knew Rocky, a lot of people who I couldn't talk to because they've died since. Mm-hmm. And again, these memories are close, you know, at the time Rocky's fighting, so they're fresher. And in that, you know, reporters sent back like a typewritten 30-page term paper, you know, with all these facts and details and stories from all of Rocky's family and friends growing up. And one of the things, it was a woman, reporter wrote, she wrote, you know, everybody gets really quiet when I ask them about his army service. And I think something happened. I think he got into some trouble. You know, but she thought it was like, you know, he got into a fight in a bar and punched an officer. And so I kind of knew that there was something going on. And then I just made a routine request to the National Archives to get his Army file. Again, not looking for dirt or anything, just to chronicle his life. And that's when I discovered the whole, you know, trial transcript. And I think back in the day when he was champion, I think maybe there were some efforts to maybe, keep that a little quieter. Because you have to remember, Rocky was a big American icon in the 50s, and this was during the Cold War. And the Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives was a congressman from Massachusetts. And he gave a speech talking about how Rocky is the symbol of American might and power, in our Cold War against Russia. So I don't think people really wanted to tarnish his reputation. And I don't think that it really tarnishes his reputation, although I can understand why.
What I thought when I read it is it kind of matches up with the stuff that Nikki told us about how they grew up. They kind of scammed some people. They threw rocks at people playing games, and they got into a lot of mischief. So when you're in the Army and you're looking for a timeout, I thought that was the most fascinating part of your story, is that you talked about how he was always getting into little trouble because he was always trying to get off base and getting into all kinds of shenanigans. But that's what he was like as a kid. It's another thing that they kind of hide about him too, is that he definitely was a womanizer. I mean, that's kind of
sure.
Nobody will deny that in his family, but it's not really talked about much. But he obviously liked to have a good time. And,
I mean, one of the things, he gives an interview to an Army doctor in his file, and he talks about losing his virginity when he's 17 and having, sex once a month, and, but there's no shame in that. He's a human being.
Right.
And, I think makes him a more compelling figure. I mean, what happened in the Army, he and another GI were convicted of assaulting and robbing 2 British civilians who they'd met at a pub, and they went back to their flat and they were drinking, and the other GI wanted money from the guy, and one thing led to another, and obviously Rocky made a mistake and he paid for it. I think the other soldier was more the instigator, but in any event, it was a 2-year gap in his life that the public never really knew about. The public story was he went to World War II, he helped ferry supplies to Normandy for D-Day, and then he came back stateside and started fighting formally as an amateur for the U.S. Army boxing team at Fort Lewis, Washington. So in a way, this whole detour in his life may have actually put him on the path to being a professional fighter.
Uh-huh.
Because if he hadn't had this episode, he wouldn't have been court-martialed. He probably wouldn't have stayed in the Army past the end of the war. Doing that allowed him to come out with an honorable discharge.
Oh, yeah, he might have ended up on the beach in Normandy.
He might have, although, and
could have died.
Could
have died for sure.
He could have died. But even beyond that, Fort Lewis is where he gets his first real formal boxing education, and has some success, makes it to the finals of the National Junior AAU Championships in Portland, Oregon. And then he has another twist, because he's such a raw, clumsy fighter. He wins the semifinal match to make it to the national championship, but he punches the guy in the top of the head and shatters the knuckle.
Mm-hmm.
And he manages to gut it out in the finals, which he loses. And then he has, he's facing his shattered knuckle and possibly never being able to punch again. And he later acknowledged that in interviews, and he said that this Japanese-American doctor basically performed this experimental operation and pulled the knuckle back into place and saved his career. And he said, I wish I could remember that doctor's name so I could thank him.
Mm-hmm.
And I found in Rocky's Army file his medical records, and the doctor's name was Thomas Takeda. Thomas Takeda's family had been interned in the Japanese internment camps during World War II.
Wow. Amazing.
So, pretty amazing stuff.
Small world, for sure. Now, what was the thing that impressed you most about your research on Rocky, just about his character and just who he was?
Well, we've just been talking about some of the, negative side of his character, but I think he was a real, he's a very inspirational story in a lot of ways. I mean, he's the classic immigrant son who doesn't have a lot of other options. He's a guy who's a classic underdog. You look at him, like his trainer Charlie Goldman said, I got a guy with 2 left feet who's balding and stoop-shouldered, and, he don't look so good in the ring in terms of style, but his opponent don't look so good on the canvas. And,
Right.
you know, and he started late. He was like 23, 24 years old. And, you know, when he started fighting, his technique was bad. He was small for even that era for a heavyweight. And, you know, the fact that he would, you know, just in a few short years rise to the heavyweight championship of the world when that was, you know, one of the most visible and coveted titles in sports is remarkable. And everyone, you know, I know boxing people will say, well, that was a real down era in boxing. But I think you underrate, I mean, some great fighters like Jersey Joe Walcott and Ezra Charles and Archie Moore. I mean, yeah, they were older, especially Walcott and Moore, but they were great fighters and they were in great shape and they were tough. I mean, back then, guys were tough. You know, they lived hand to mouth. I mean, some of them weren't doing it for the riches. They were doing it just to feed their families.
Right.
And really rugged guys. And, you know, I agree, boxing was in decline. I mean, I think World War II, you know, a lot of guys went off to the war, so it kind of dried up the supply, and then television comes along after World War II and initially elevates boxing even more because now there's all this TV money coming in. But in the process, it starts to kill all the local boxing clubs, and it dries up the pool of talent. And the other thing you have is, you know, a lot of guys like Rocky and Walcott, you know, it's like boxers are people that come out of hard times and they struggle. And as the Italians, you know, become more prosperous and successful, successive generations, you know, their families aren't wanting them to get into the boxing ring.
Right.
So I think things did start to go down.
Even Rocky,
yeah.
who had a great after-boxing life, he got to hang out with all these famous people and mobsters who would pay for whatever he wanted to do. I mean,
yeah.
He was taken advantage of so bad by Al Weil from stories that I heard, where Al Weil demanded 50% of everything he made for life. So it was kind of like, you know, the worst contract he could have signed. And one of the reasons why people think that he was going from city to city, you know, right before his birthday and couldn't, you know, get the right transportation together to get back to his family in time was because he had to make these appearances to make cash so that he wouldn't have to report it to Al Weil and give him any more money because he was determined at the end of his career. And a lot of people think that's why one of the reasons why he retired. It was more than just his back issue. He didn't want to give any more money to Al.
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, he did have a contract with Weil. Weil took half of his earnings, and you're right, that included appearances and things outside of the ring. But the contract did run out a few years after he retired.
Okay.
But what happened was that, first of all, Weil was taking half, and he was very abusive and abrasive the way he would treat Rocky like a little kid and, you know, tell him when he could see his girlfriend and wife, when he could get married, you know, when he had to be here or there, and he was very, you know, obnoxious about it sometimes. But Rocky knew that this was the guy he needed to deal with to get to the title because he was connected. But on top of taking half his earnings in and out of the ring, you know, Rocky later found out that Weil was skimming off the top because the idea is that, you know, Weil gets half of his purse after all the expenses are taken out. And Weil was, you know, exaggerating the expenses and then taking some money off the purse before they divvied it up. And so he found that out. And, you know, Rocky came up hard, like we talked about. There was gambling and guys shooting dice in the woods behind the ball field where he grew up. And, you know, he and his friends would go try to raid it and stuff like that. So they were always looking and hustling for a buck. That's the way they grew up. And so all this created this real suspicion and mistrust in him when he retired about money.
Right.
He didn't trust, in one sense, he didn't trust people, and he only wanted cash. And there's legions of stories about his eccentricities with cash.
Mm-hmm.
And
still some buried places today family thinks that they don't know about.
Yeah. Well, it's tragic. I mean, so you're right. What happened was, so by the time he, you know, got to the end of his life and took this tragic plane ride, I mean, he was no longer worried about Al Weil. Al Weil was actually dying in a nursing home at that point. But what it was just a creature of habit. and he would get, he was still the only unbeaten heavyweight champ in history, and, he was still a big name in the 60s, and there were always wealthy businessmen who wanted to be around him, who would give him money. Mob guys wined and dined him. Guys would let him into various business ventures. And he could always find another deal and always find more money. But, he always wanted more, and he would, and he always felt he was the breadwinner for his large extended family, and he'd always bring them, bags of cash. And, but by the end, he was just, didn't trust other people, and, someone would give him a commercial airline ticket to go fly to Chicago for a public appearance, and he would cash the ticket in and pocket the money, and then find some, rich business guy who had his own little private Cessna and would fly him there for free.
Right.
And he's in Chicago. He's about to fly home to Florida to celebrate his 46th birthday, and a mobster pal in Chicago, Frankie Freddo, says, "Hey, why don't you go to Des Moines first? My nephew's opening up a steakhouse, having a party." And they get into a little Cessna airplane with an inexperienced pilot, and they fly into a big thunderstorm over Iowa, and the plane crashes. And, Rocky's family and friends have been telling him for years to, stop taking unnecessary risks with these small planes. He's had other scary episodes. One time he's in a plane in California flying to Palm Springs. Frank Sinatra lets him take his plane and his pilot. And the pilot is hungover and falls asleep, when the plane is in flight.
Jesus.
And, Rocky's totally cool to cucumber, just like before a fight, and he just takes a nap. Everyone else is freaking out. So there were a lot of, and then the pilot woke up and they landed safely, but there were a lot of these near misses before the fatal plane crash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just an amazing story, and tragic end. I got to do a lot of research on Ali Colombo, in particular, his trainer, and just the promise that he saw in him, and just the fact that he was kind of like the manager of the kids in the neighborhood. He set the teams up, and he's just an interesting character altogether. But I interviewed his brother, Richie, and Nikki Sylvester over the years. I talked to Peter a bunch of times. I wrote a biography on Ali, and just met so many Brockton people who knew Rocky over the years that I lived around there. And even Goody Petronelli, he was wanting to open up a boxing gym with Rocky. And the way he put it to me is, when he heard about his death, that he could have knocked me over with a feather. He said it was just horrible. And
they had plans to open a gym together, which the Petronellis did without Rocky. And one of their star fighter was Marvin Hagler.
Yeah.
So if Rocky had lived, he could have been Marvelous Marvin Hagler's manager.
And I was just telling Tony that, it's kind of crazy that I came along at the time that I did, and I got to do a lot of these interviews, which was for a lot of these people, probably one of the last interviews they did before they died. So it's just great to be part of that, and then to find out that you wrote a book with, looking back on some of my material, it was very flattering and just amazing to.
Yeah, well, the Bleacher Report piece you did on Ali Colombo was terrific, and Ali was a really good guy, and there were so many ruthless guys in boxing. They're just out to exploit the fighters like pounds of flesh, and then cast them aside when they can no longer make them a buck.
Right.
And Ali was a guy. He wasn't an experienced trainer, but he just had this vision, and he was always kind of like older than his age, and always, like you said, the organizer of the games. And he just, he was the first guy to say, "Oh yeah, Rocky could go all the way to the championship," and how ridiculous was that? Mm-hmm. He's just gotten out of the army. He's totally clumsy. He's had no formal training. And Ali is going to the Brockton Public Library and checking out books about boxing and reading everything he can. And he's the one guy who was with Rocky by his side throughout the entire career. He would be out running with him in the, through the streets of Brockton. He would, hitchhike on the produce truck to New York so they could train, with Charlie Goldman at the CYO gym and live in the rooming house at the Y for $1 a night. And,
he invested quite a bit of his own money, too, from the Army.
Yeah, and he he kind of bankrolled. He was in the Army. He was a quartermaster. And, he helped bankroll them until they got rolling, and he had his own money coming in. But Ali was always by his side. Ali actually got Rocky his first professional fight when he fought under the, assumed name of Rocky Mack on, St. Patrick's Day, and in Holyoke, Massachusetts. Rocky was stationed at the Westover base near there and arranged for the fight. So, Ali was there with him in the corner for all the dramatic big fights. And, initially when they signed with Al Weil, Weil said, "What's this arrangement with Ali Colombo? We don't need him in the corner." And Rocky stood it up and said, "No, he stays with me." And Weil said, "Well, you can pay him out of your share." And he did. Mm-hmm. And it was really touching, that trial I mentioned with Rocky's first amateur manager. Ali was a nervous guy. He got a nosebleed. He was so nervous having to take the stand. But what came out was how dedicated he was to him and how everything he did for him and with him. And basically for a couple of years there, we basically made no money. And the lawyer who's cross-examining him is trying to mock him about it, and he's just a very earnest guy.
Yeah.
Of course you just have to sell Rocky and, to the highest bidder and cash in on him, and it obviously was not the case.
Yeah, another guy who unfortunately passed away a little too early, Mike Pusateri, probably gave me some of the best information about, Ali after Rocky, and, how he just kept trying to produce the next champion, never could quite find the right person, but just dedicated his life to the sport after that, too, so it just didn't stop with Rocky. Yeah. And he impacted a lot.
But he got off the carousel when Rocky retired and kind of lost his bearings and lost his roots and was wandering, all over the country, with whoever would hang out with him. Ali went back home and, with his daughters and his family, and, he worked in the grocery warehouse and, like you said, kept trying to help out other fighters.
And one of the big focuses in Rocky's life and the whole neighborhood was baseball. And another one of the things that I never heard of before I read your book was the guy that the park was named after where they played was like the original mall Santa.
Yeah, James Edgar Playground.
Yeah, I never heard
James
that
Edgar. He had a famous department store in downtown Brockton. Brockton was a very prosperous city, from the shoe factories and in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and James Edgar was a Scottish immigrant who came and opened up a department store, kind of like Macy's, and, he used to always dress up as different characters for the different holidays, and Christmas time he dressed up as Santa, and it was a huge hit, and actually, people were coming down from Boston to see it, and the people that ran Macy's came up from New York, and that's where they got the idea. And, Rocky, the defining place in his life as a boy was James Edgar Playground.
Yeah,
which, he grew up on the playground and
the moment
played ball there.
It dawned on me how important the baseball was to the boxing was when I was in George's Cafe one day and I was looking at a picture of Rocky swinging the bat as a kid. And then I thought about the crouch and how we would come up from the crouch to throw that right hand. And it just clicked in my head, that the strength from the way he used to hit in baseball is half of the strength he gets from boxing. He just adapted it to a different sport because he couldn't follow the dream.
And I give Charlie Golden credit for that because Charlie was a very shrewd trainer. I mean, he knew everything, but he also knew that not to make a fighter into something he wasn't.
Right.
Like, he wasn't going to make, Rocky into a fancy Dan, as they used to call it. And he said, look, I don't want to take, he had that big looping overhead right that he nicknamed Susie Q, and it had such power, probably one of the most powerful punches in heavyweight history. And normally fighters aren't, you got to shorten those punches because they lose their power. You leave yourself open to a counter punch. And, but also, Charlie said, no, I got to work with his natural talents and just refine the things around it. And he wasn't going to take away that Susie Q, so he just taught him to fight inside, which he had to do because he was shorter, with shorter arms than his opponents usually. And he said, just get low to the ground like a crab and just punch up. And, punch up from a catcher's crouch. And, Charlie had schooled other fighters decades earlier in that technique. And so it did work with Rocky. It was a natural thing. And again, when Rocky could get inside a guy, which he had to usually, he could use his strength to kind of bull the guy.
Right.
And, even if Rocky, for all his clumsiness, he was so, powerful punching, but also he could take a punch. Right. And he trained like a fanatic, so he was never going to, wear out. And so he'd get stronger as the fight would get longer. And but they usually didn't last long because he could knock guys out. And even if he, was crude and, his punch didn't land where he wanted it to, it hurt wherever it hit you.
Yeah.
There was his second fight against Roland Lastarza. He punched him on the forearm and shattered blood vessels in his arm. Yeah. I mean, that's not where he was trying to hit him, but, one opponent said every time he hit you, you saw a flash of light. And, Archie Moore had the great line. He said that trying to fight him is like trying to fight the, whirling blades of a helicopter or a propeller. It's just unbelievable.
And there was one right here.
The classic was a fight, because one thing is, I have one of those pictures in my gym of him with Lastarza on the ropes landing the Susie Q, right hand, and just week I was one of my trainees was over and we were working together, and he's a police officer, and I've been training him. He wasn't able to do it last year because of a back injury, but in the spring they do in Philadelphia police officers versus firefighters exhibition show, and he's been trying to get on it, and I'm working as his trainer now. And he's a little taller than me. He's about maybe 5'10", 5'11". He's about 200 pounds. Strong, physical guy. And we were talking about like different styles and how to work against different styles. And I said, sometimes you might get in there with a guy that is taller than you. He's got a tight defense, and sometimes you may have a hard time getting around it. And then I pointed to that photo, and I said, go back and watch clips of this fight. And I said, Rocky couldn't get around his defense. The stars almost beat him in the first fight because of a tight, very stand up, straight up, arms in tight, hands up defense, and Rocky had a hard time breaking, getting around it. So in the second fight, he went through it. And I said, he was beating him around the arms so bad, you see little stars, his arms have to drop it. And when you can't defend yourself, what happens? And I said, sometimes that's what you got to do. I said, I used to take that as a badge of honor when guys would come up to me at the front and say, wow, you reminded me almost like a little Marciano there, because you were going in there and you were just trying to hit anywhere you could. And then one thing, and here's my quote. I said, especially amateur boxing, there's something, and I do the hand quotes, a scoring punch, a blow to the head. The body shots, they don't count as much, which is bullshit, but a scoring punch. I said, you know what? You go to Roland Lastarza right now, and you tell him that those punches rocking in his arms, quote-unquote, not scoring punches. You take some of the times I fought guys, and I said when I was punching them in the shoulders, punching them around the arms, the biceps, anywhere I could, the hips, I didn't care. Tell me those weren't scoring punches when you can't walk the next and you can't lift your arms, feed yourself.
Well, it's nothing else. It's punches that are going to, take their toll in later rounds when your opponent is worn down or can't lift his arms and leaves himself open for what really is a scoring punch, the final punch. But yeah, it's all the ones leading up to it, the building blocks that,
My favorite quote of all time about Rocky was from Ed Fitzgerald, one of the big sports writers of the day. He said, slowly, relentlessly, ruthlessly, he moves in on you. Sooner or later, he clubs you down.
Well, I think I wrote in my book that, he's like a working class guy who trudges in with a pickaxe and starts, hammering away at the brick wall, and it seems like nothing's going to happen, and then suddenly the brick wall crumbles. And that was Rocky. He's like the guy punching the time clock, and, against the insurmountable, it's like the irresistible force against the immovable eventually he's going to beat it down. And he was in such great condition that nobody was going to outwork him or outlast him. You know, they might
amazing
cut him.
To me, meeting some of the people who actually knew him. And a funny story I could tell real quick here is when I was training up at Goody Petronelli's gym, and I had interviewed Goody and, you know, met him and through to Dennis, and so I was actually trying to get into an amateur boxing situation. I had boxed in college, so I wanted to do it again, and I was in shape. So I went up to Goody's gym and had some sparring, and one day I was hitting the bag, and I had been studying Rocky for the first time, and I really wanted to perfect that right hand. I wanted to match exactly how he threw it, you know. So I studied tape, and I watched it over and over again. I practiced on my own heavy bag, and then I come to the gym one night, and I, you know, so impressed with my own skills, I want to show Goody. So I say, Goody, watch this. I'm going to land the Rocky right hand, you know. So I throw the punch at the bag, and he just laughs. And he goes, no, not even close.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's got to be, like Charlie Goldman, it's got to be tailored to your own strengths and, you know, characteristics. You can't just force it or try to emulate somebody else if it doesn't come naturally.
But one thing I did learn about Rocky, more than the punching power of the crouch, was the defensive aspect of it. From kind of emulating that style myself, I realized that, you know, it's so much harder for a taller opponent to hit you when you're trying to punch down at a guy that's crouched like that. It's just, there's no power.
Yeah.
So
it's like a turtle in a shell or a crab in a shell, you know.
So it was
kind of
both ways for him, and a lot of people don't realize that. They don't even understand why he crouched so much in a lot of ways. But, you know, you look at the baseball aspect of it, how you come up. You look at the fact that he was a catcher too, so, you know, he has that power to stand up and down quickly, and, you know, all that stuff factored in. And,
well, he also had really powerful legs.
Yeah, from running a lot.
And from running, and the way he was built, and he certainly, you know, refined it. I mean, I have a picture on my desk here of one of the shoes that he trained in, and you look at the front, the sole near the front, near the big toe, and there's just a quarter-size hole worn in the leather. You know, it's that constant repetition and force. And I wrote about how he would go through a pair of training shoes, how when he got successful, the local shoe factories would make him special shoes, and, you know, the women on the assembly line wanted to sign a pair, and, you know, he would take a pair of shoes and run it, you know, 700 miles and wear it out.
Yeah, Nicky Sylvester told us all kinds of stories about where they used to run, and from Brockton to Providence, sometimes they would run the whole way in dress shoes and not even sneakers.
Yeah, it was crazy. You know, I think, you know, he would walk to a Brockton, you know, road game in Quincy or somewhere. He would say, "Yeah, let's walk to Providence," which is 35 miles, and, you know, I think Nicky would say, "No, we got to get a ride back. I can't walk back." But yeah, that's how Rocky was. And he liked training, you know, until the end when he burned out and he was having back trouble and getting disillusioned with some things that were going on. He loved training.
Right. Yeah, I think his wife even caught him on their honeymoon, getting up to do some road work.
He did, yeah. And she said, "Honey, you don't have to sneak out. I'll follow you along the car." And she did, you know. But yeah, you know, I think it was Jim Buchanan, the great sports columnist in the 50s, said, you know, his body was his armor, and he, you know, treated it like, you know, his livelihood, and he did. I mean, he sacrificed a lot, and he trained, you know, he would box like maybe 300 rounds, or spar 300 rounds, you know, to get ready for, like, when he fought Walcott for the title the first time.
I think it was Skian's book where he talked about somebody showing up to the sparring match after one round with him before. They showed up with the catcher's gear, you know, the shield, the whole thing you put over your neck because the body shots hurt so bad. The guy said he had to wear some protection in the next time.
Oh yeah, it was not a pleasant experience. He liked to bang on you, and sometimes Charlie Goldman, just to make him focus on developing his technique, would just say, "You can't hit the heavy bag or spar with a live fighter for a couple of days," which would drive Rocky crazy. But, you know, it was a way to show that he had to work on other And Rocky was a good pupil. He didn't fight him on that. Charlie, marveled at how cooperative Rocky was and how hard he worked. And usually the trainer is trying to get the fighter to work harder and stop sneaking out to go party. But Rocky, there was a time Charlie said, "You should go down. Why don't you go down to, Grossinger's to the, the hotel and watch a show or something. All you do is work and train." And Rocky said, "No, I prefer it up here. It's quieter up in the cabin, up on the side of the mountain in the wilderness."
Mm-hmm. Now, who would you say was the most interesting character you met and talked to in producing this book?
Geez. There's so many, but certainly some of the old timers who I talked to, guys like Lou Duva and Steve Clinto before they passed away. I was fortunate to get to talk to them. I was actually able to talk to Jimmy Breslin, the great Jimmy Breslin, who was a writer on Rocky's TV talk show, The Main Event, that he had after he retired in the early 60s. And I was able to talk to him in his New York apartment before he passed away. I really felt it was almost like the greatest generation. I felt like I was rushing to kind of capture these guys' stories before they, departed the earth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything happens for a reason, right?
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in that. You come along at just the right time. Sometimes you get an opportunity, and it defines somebody in a different way, and we get to look at their whole life. And I think that's what you've done with this book. And I'm 100 pages in, and I just told Tony I'm going to have to buy him one because I'm working so hard lately I don't even have enough time to read.
Well, that's an admirable gesture. I appreciate that. And next year is going to be the 50th anniversary of his untimely death.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy.
So.
Well, I would have never known anything about him if Tony wasn't looking for a T-shirt one day.
I have a couple of those T-shirts. They're great.
Yeah, amazing with the whole record on the back and all that.
Yep, that's right. So.
Well, the other thing people kind of forget about is this knockout percentage. I mean, 43 knockouts.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
It's one of the... And, I know that he has his critics about, a lot of the guys he fought on the way up were nothing great. But, there were some legitimate, journeyman-type fighters in there who were tough and not pushovers. And, Rocky was pretty raw at the beginning. And it would have been very easy to lose to some of them. And, he didn't.
Well, the crazy thing was he weighed 185 to 189 and change for most of his fights.
Yeah.
The majority of his fights. And that's like cruiserweight now.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, though, if Rocky was alive today, if with modern training methods, if Rocky would be bigger or if he would be a cruiserweight. Maybe with his height, he'd be a cruiserweight. So, I don't know. But, the fighters are much bigger today. But I'm not sure they hit harder.
No, definitely not. Just just amazing. And that the Jersey Joe Walcott punch is so fascinating to me because the more you watch it, the more you realize that half a second separated that from being either a double knockout or Jersey Joe getting it first.
Yeah, Walcott said that if he had, led with his other hand, that, Rocky might have missed him and just fallen from exhaustion because they were both pretty worn out at that point. It was the 13th round. And, Rocky had just gone back to his corner before the round and, asked his cornerman, "How am I doing?" And they all screamed at once, "You got to knock him out because you're losing on points." And so he rallied and did. He always did what he had to do.
The other thing that you notice in that little short frame of that knockout is another technique that Charlie Goldman taught Rocky with the jab. He had a literal pawing jab because Charlie used a cat to show him how to throw it. He brought a cat right up on the table somewhere at a restaurant, I think, or wherever they were hanging out, and he showed him playing with the string how the cat jabs first and then swipes with the other paw. And that's exactly how Rocky fought a lot. You see him just kind of pawing with that left and then wham with the right. It's just like a cat.
He was very proud of, Rocky was a pretty easygoing guy outside of the ring. And, he understood that, hey, I'm not the most, I'm not going to win on style points. was a part of him that was proud and, you know, and really wanted to show that he could box and he could learn some of the techniques that people ridiculed him for lacking. And he did. And he got better. I mean, and he was proud of that. He talked to some people that I interviewed about his pride in that, and, you know, it showed.
Mm-hmm. Well, you should be proud of yourself. You put together a fantastic book, and I'm definitely going to be giving you more praise, I'm sure, when I'm finished with it. But so far, it's amazing. Well, I've learned a lot, and I'm glad we met, and I'm glad you were able to use some of my material, for sure.
Well, it was my honor, and I appreciate your time, Rich, and the rest of you guys. It was good to talk to you, and, you know, enjoy your evening. And
maybe Psychic Tom, before he goes, can read your fortune.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Let's get some lucky numbers. 6, 14, 22. Okay. No, this has been a great effort. I just can't wait to get the book myself. And you mentioned in there about the Carmine Vingo fight, how that changed Rocky. And I haven't heard the interview or read the book yet. So do you have a minute to elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think it was a real pivotal fight in his career, and it doesn't get as much attention as the later fights. And I wish there was video of it that I couldn't find. But, you know, it was his first big fight in Madison Square Garden. And Vingo was a younger but also undefeated and, you know, up-and-coming, you know, Italian heavyweight. I take that back. I'm not sure he was undefeated. But in any event, there were two brawling Italian fighters, and there was a lot of anticipation. And Rocky said it was the hardest he was ever hit. And at one point he said Vingo, you know, hit him in the chest, and Rocky blacked out. But he stayed on his feet and went into a clinch until he recovered his senses. But they just were wailing away at each other with a pace that, you know, would be more worthy of lightweights. And, you know, Rocky was knocking Vingo down, but Vingo would just come back get up and come right back at Rocky. He was fearless. And they went like that. You know, the New York Times writer said it was like they kept fighting until human endurance could seemingly take no more. And finally, Rocky knocked him down a couple of times in the 6th round, and the last time he went down and he kind of thumped his head on the canvas. And while Rocky was celebrating, Vingo slipped into a coma. And he carried him to his dressing room, and the doctor worked on him, and they landed a Brockman priest who was on his way to congratulate Rocky, and they grabbed him and pulled him into Vingo's dressing room, and he administered the last rites. And then they took him to the hospital, and there was this really tense, you know, by now Rocky's been told that you better get over to the hospital. And he goes over, and, you know, Vingo's family is there. Rocky's in tears. He goes up to Vingo's mother to apologize, and they have this really uneasy vigil. And, you know, a lot of people are wondering, of course, first and foremost, is Vingo going to live? And secondly, you know, if he doesn't, what's this going to do to Rocky's heat and ability to continue to be a, you know, potential contender? And Vingo lives, but he never fights again, and he's got a permanent limp, and he's blind in one eye. And he never, till his dying day, remembers that fight. You know, he remembers climbing the 6th step and coming down in Madison Square Garden and entering the ring, and the next thing he remembers is waking up in a hospital bed and looking up at his mother's face. And he said, you know, after Rocky died, he said, you know, I don't remember a thing about that fight, but I remember Rocky, he was a good guy, because Rocky helped him out, you know, paying his hospital bills. And, you know, there's a great picture of Rocky with the blackened eye himself, you know, praying in church that week for Vingo's recovery that, you know, I have in the book.
Awesome.
So to me, that was a real critical fight because it could have gone a different way, and it really put Rocky on the map, and it really illustrated the dark side of boxing and kind of the bloodlust and the crowd's attraction to death in the ring. And, you know, it ended Vingo's career, and it put Rocky on the upward trajectory and made people say, hey, I'm going to go see the guy that almost killed Vingo. And, you know, his next big fight was Roland Esparza, and that was another big fight, two guys who were both undefeated. Mingo fight was a really critical one, and I devoted a chapter to it because I think it was so important. And it also illustrated that for every winner, there's guys whose careers end tragically. And, there's no guarantee that you're going to turn out the way Rocky did. I equate it to the, if you follow the New England Patriots, they seem, over the last decade or so like a dynasty because they won 5 Super Bowls. But you look at those games and didn't blow anyone out. And a lot of these games went down to the last play, and it was very tenuous whether they were going to win. And that's how Rocky's career was, even though he was unbeaten and history's only unbeaten heavyweight champ.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of things that happened to him that,
for sure.
Career. And, certain things hadn't happened exactly the way they did. Things might not have gone the way they did. Probably his closest time to defeat was the Ezra Charles fight. It's probably the most amazing story of his entire career, really, because he was just he had to tell the referee, just give me one more round. And then
they were ready to stop the fight. His nose was split, hanging in flaps, blood was gushing, and he just went into overdrive and just pulled him into submission. So,
you wouldn't believe it if you read it in a book, half of the stuff that he did.
yeah. Oh, it was fun to recreate those fights, so that's something people who have read the book said they really enjoyed. They say, I know Rocky ended his career undefeated, but it's really dramatic reading how these fights are playing out.
Right. Well, it's been great chatting with you, Mike. We'll let you get back to what you were doing, and we look forward to getting the book out to Tony and Tom, and all of us getting to the end and really appreciating the whole work. But from what I've read already, it's amazing, and it's a whole new perspective on a lot of the stuff about Rocky that I never knew. So, speaking from somebody who's talked to a lot of the family members, I learned as much as I possibly could at times, but you still got stuff I didn't find out.
Well, it was good to talk to you guys, and keep in touch and keep up the good work.
All right, awesome.
Okay, have a good night, everyone.
All
right. Take care.
We'll send you a link to the show, too. So there you have it. There is Mike Stanton, author of Unbeaten, Rocky Marciano's Fight for Perfection in a Crooked World. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it from the official publisher's website. Just search the name Unbeaten, Mike Stanton, just the way it sounds, Stanton, and you'll find it. And I'm feeling generous tonight, so I'll send you a copy too, Tom. Just send me your address, and we'll get it to you.
Wow. Okay. Boy, this was great. This was a trip back in time.
Right.
Just listening to the work he did. Well, I was just time tripping through the whole thing. Oh,
yeah, as somebody who's done investigative reporting, like trials and court stuff is, it's like he said, it can be a gold mine for information, and I didn't really use a lot of transcripts from my research into the Fertitas, but that's really what got me into the whole Zion story to begin with. That got me sued by the Fertitas. But it was looking at all the court cases that Zion was involved in, and finding out the details of why they got sued, and talking to the people that were involved in those lawsuits. So I can definitely relate to that style of chipping away to find the intimate details. But yeah, that was the biggest surprise of the book, was the whole thing with Rocky, with the Army service being a little tainted. But hey, different times, and Rocky was kind of a little bit of a hoodlum growing up, so it takes a little while to get that out of you. Obviously, boxing did that for him.
Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. All right, so I guess that's it. We didn't really miss anything before the show. Covered everything, and just happened to connect with him just in time after we ran out of our content. So that's all she wrote. Great job, Mike. Thanks for the interview, and good job, you guys.
All right. See you guys next week.
Yes, sir. We already lose Tony? I guess so. All right, folks. This is Rabble Rousing Rich signing off.